faith and love and strength to follow on the path you set before us. Through Jesus Christ. Amen. The Gospel of Mark 5. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowded against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus with synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise be to you, Lord Jesus.
It was all made possible because Jesus got in the boat and went to the other side of the lake. The easy thing would have been for Jesus to stay where he was. He had a lot of good work he had done there, could continue to do there. There was no doubt way more than Jesus could ever have accomplished on the side of the lake he was on. But then he decided to go to the other side of the lake. You see, the decision to go is always the first step. Whether you are Jesus in a boat 2,000 years ago, or whether you're the 10 women from Sheboygan who decide to get on an airplane. The first decision is, will I go to the other side of the lake? There's a song, "People Need the Lord," and that could not have been any more true as it was in Jesus' time than it is even now. In parts of this world where there's desolate poverty, people need the Lord. They need the touch of the Lord. And so as Jesus made that decision to risk crossing the lake to meet unknown needs, so these women got on the plane to go to a part of the world most of them had never been to meet unknown needs. Waiting there on the other side of the lake for Jesus was a large crowd of people who had heard about this Jesus. They'd heard him like people have heard about Jesus today, probably news and some gossip, and some of it right, some of it way wrong. Some people stay home. Some people are too busy to go see Jesus, too skeptical about this Jesus story. They hear that he's not the real deal, too afraid to find out what might be true. But then there were those who went to meet Jesus. There they were on the shore, forming a crowd to meet him, and hidden in the midst of this crowd was a young woman. And if it was possible to be alone in the midst of a crowd, this woman had figured out how to do it. She was dressed modestly like all the other women. You couldn't really make out her face or her shape. She was just a figure in the crowd. Never be able to figure out who she was. There was another thing you could not figure out about this woman. She was desperate to touch Jesus. She was afraid, the kind of afraid you are when your body, you know this feeling, right? You're shaking, you're cold and clammy, you'd like to run away, but you're too afraid to even move. That kind of fear, that kind of anxiety. And then there's another thing you can't know about this woman from the outside, and that is that she was bleeding, hemorrhaging. Not menstrual cycle kind of bleeding, but constant, probably uterine bleeding that could not be controlled. She was a very sick woman for 12 years, living with this non-curable cancer or whatever it was that caused her bleeding. She'd been told by her priest under the law she was unclean, and while we don't like it, the fact is you can't come to the synagogue anymore. You're not even permitted to touch anyone nor let anyone to touch you, for they will then become unclean too. If ever there was a woman desperate for a human touch, it was this woman. Can you imagine it? 12 years of no touch to the skin, skin to skin. No one to hold your hand, no one to give you a hug. Thinking even God doesn't want to touch someone like you because you're too sick, you're too different. So I think of the children in the orphanage we heard about today. There they are. No home to call their own, no mom to hold them, to place a hand on their fevered brow, no dad to lift them up in the sky. Children so desperate for a touch. But if you don't look closely, why, you wouldn't even know they existed. Just like we didn't know they existed until a year ago. Unless you're Jesus, who gets in the boat to be present where the desperate woman is. Unless you are 10 women who have Jesus living in them and get on the plane to be present where the desperate children are. So the woman had heard about this Jesus, and she believed what she had heard. She believed that the body, why even the clothes that wrapped the body was her cure. But how would she be able to touch him, right? Perhaps she never would have been able to do so if it had not been for this other man, this leader of the synagogue who comes out to meet Jesus. This person as different from this woman as could be. He was a well-to-do, respected leader of a society, a nice house, servants, money, great job. She's sick, outcast, a woman who has all of her money spent on cures that could not cure her. As different as could be, and yet they had one thing in common. They both had unshakable faith that Jesus could heal with a touch. The man approaches Jesus, falls at his feet with his face to the ground. This man who seemingly had it all humbly pleads for Jesus for one thing he cannot buy: life for his daughter. So he pleads with Jesus that he comes to his house to touch his daughter who is dying. The touch of Jesus that brings life, salvation. So the crowd is stopped for this conversation to happen, and while the crowd is stopped, our desperately sick woman works her way through the crowd, falling to her knees. She gets to the white robe of Jesus, and she reaches through the crushing crowd of bodies, and she completes her mission. She touches Jesus, the hem of his cloak. And there on her knees she feels it happen. The bleeding stops. She knows in an instant she is healed. The man and his servants and Jesus' disciples turn to head out to the man's home. But Jesus stays put. He says, "Who touched me?" And people think, well, is this a joke? Who touched you? Hundreds of people around you, Jesus. But Jesus knew someone with great faith had touched him. Everyone was touching him, but only one woman was healed. It isn't magic, of course. Jesus doesn't do magic tricks. Jesus could have healed her from 1,000 miles away, but for her act of touching him, it was a great act of faith. And so what will be your great act of faith that you will do so that Jesus can heal you? You see, Jesus wants to heal you too. What great act of faith is he calling you to do? You know, maybe her theology was not quite right. Maybe she broke the rules of society. No rules. Maybe she broke the rules of the church by even being in a crowd. Maybe she was someone that her society and her church had written off as a lost cause, like a bunch of orphans in some place in Mexico. But to Jesus, he had to follow up that touch with a blessing. With the blessing of letting this woman know that she was known by Jesus. So the woman, healed, but still afraid, steps forward. And she says, I touched you, Lord. And then Jesus does something more amazing than she could have ever hoped. Then he really heals her. He welcomes her into the family of God. He doesn't call her out for breaking the law, which he wrote. He doesn't get angry about being interrupted on his way to help the man's daughter. He doesn't call her unclean. No, instead of that, the inclusive, welcoming, affirming Jesus says, daughter. Society's orphan had been adopted by Jesus. Welcome home, daughter. Sounds like a mission team to me. They took the step of faith, getting on the. They taught society's orphans that they were the sons and daughters, that they had a father and a brother who knew them, each one by name, and that they had a mother and a sister whom they could touch. They touched Jesus, and they were healed. Please rise for the blessing.